Kaya yaksatini iltakat Johan Gulchish. Wasach tu yakewuchin hasati. Ya chakuksa awe Johan. Kunach yake linkage tu. Ya haka out the gun. Ya yaki haka out the gun. Ya ak kwan ani kach. Jay kugink kuat ya yaki. Ya tli tin wudut leyech ya ach kudasi cha ach kina kudasi. A joy chet kaudu asai. Heshwasa o tiqoa. Ya atlein at a data we you took the tongue. Johan ya dachte hin wush kanach wututa a the cut we tuxandik a. Aka kekigi kanaskigi Ge awe gwash tlech de hin kachwa chwasa beginning advanced. No, beginning intermediate advanced. Beginning qa'a adat yutuchtatan. Akakedi. Akakedi. Aka awe intermediate as yadi. Advanced as. Adach awe we tlech ashkashnik. Qastin you do sagan awe qastin. We tleinach cha qich adach sagwedi. Ho'owe ha'in skawulnigen. Tlech de hin yashkalnik. Ch'ak. Gwell tu awe. Tu you do a sag. We on. Tu a. Tlech chach inach cha letuya be. Ag aya gwell hin tade wushach it awe atlein. At a gatit tlein. Sha kanach awe geosatan. Sha kanach. Yes, the cutway sha kanach awe geosatan. Ach, I was at the cutway as kwani. Just like as uyach. Ag awe wudahan. Ga wanani soe kone ke uwe ik we as. Chate achjige. De nach aya we do we chakuta as kwani. Kone ke hasu ik. Esautu ach. A joe do chait aya has aus achi. Ya tletzin du tuye wutien. A kakone a jiwa nakats usani. Ya yis as kwani owe ke uwa we sha shakich. Ye awa adat you tichtatan, Johan. The cut Johan. Ya as kwani chasati wuchi. At gitai chush jin to shut. Ye awa ach lish kutlein dana wak. Ye awa. Yisatin sha shakich. Gwash shidzi aya. Has kusti ya as. Katlana ya we glade. Kasa ataya yu uchja kanachoya katawa Jan krahas kutzati a joit at gitai chaya a chati wushjin al shat yewe haslingit kusti Gulchishach sa achi a dadiuch agachtir la atle kach inach Gulchish, it's great to see everybody. What was I talking about? I'm going to put the people on the screen.
You mentioned Akwani quite a bit, tree people.
Yeah, what?
And I think you were talking when you mentioned Lituya Bay, the tidal wave that hit there long before.
Yeah, what? It might have been like 1906 or something. Anything else? You guys catch anything else?
Over the mountains?
Yes. The wave washed over the whole mountain.
Something about the sun and it being sunny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sun shining on us today.
Yeah.
It's warm. I shouldn't have wore 2 wool shirts. But it's okay.
But didn't you also say it was cold yesterday?
I was talking about being cold on top of a mountain. Yeah,
Ah,
I was saying that. What about beginner, intermediate, advanced? You guys catch that stuff?
Something about Monday and Wednesday.
Okay.
Ikyagi, Katsukyagi.
Yes. So think about a lot of things because I'm with you folks on Tuesday, Thursdays, and the advanced group on Monday, Wednesday. Just like playing it every evening. It's really fun. Anything else? So I was thinking about, a while ago I came up with potential names for beginning, intermediate, and advanced. So for beginning, I was thinking, Akadi. Anybody know what Akadi is?
Let's start with ach. Ach.
Well, okay, is the possessive. And so the noun itself is Akadi. Akadi. Anybody ever hear that word? It's a seed.
See.
So beginners would be seeds. I guess with this metaphor, they could be tsusani, but I thought Akadi might be. There's a Akadi and it's tsusani. So then intermediate would be as Yádi. And what do you think of as Yádi is?
Like
Tree people.
Children of the trees.
isn't that little tree people?
Children tree. For children.
Little baby tree, yeah. So it's like it's becoming a tree. And then advanced would be as. So like trying to think of these stages because of this story that I had heard from Clarence Jackson, which was in Latuya Bay. There was like a big rock slide, and it created this giant tidal wave, this giant wave. And the wave washed over like an entire mountain. And it washed off it tore all the trees off of the mountain. But there's just one tree left standing, and it started to scream, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" And on the other side, this patch of trees yelled back, "We hear your voice." And that gave that little lonely tree strength, and it started to release pine cones, and it rebuilt the forest on the top of the mountain. And I thought about that because I thought about trying to find a metaphor for folks who are learning Lingi and trying to find stages of growth. We'd also messed around with saying like shallow water, deep water, halibut hole. But then someone brought up that they didn't want to drown. So we're like, okay, yeah. What about a tree? That's because the tree grows. And so, but then it kind of matches with that story pretty nice to sort of think of that as a concept. And then Austin Hammond used to say, if you look up on the mountaintops in our country, you see trees up there. And you might think, how on earth does a tree like live up there? It's so cold, the snow's deep, the wind blows really hard. But he says, because underneath the soil, the roots are intertwined. And he'd say that's how our culture is we're holding each other's hands. We're being strong together. So those are the things I was talking about at the beginning. Any thoughts, any language questions in general that you have?
What's to do with south tidal wave? Think of
Teat plane. Well, teat is a wave.
Right.
And so teat plane would be like a big wave.
Yeah.
Anything else? Wasabuti Tleatke Daguniki. How was Thursday? With Noea. What'd you guys do?
Remember the story again?
Táax'aa. Okay. So deep dives into Táax'aa. Hanging out with Dog. And incredible use of language, incredible stuff. So we're going to keep sort of looking at Táax'aa, but then we're going to sort of like start including a couple other things. So one is we did the sort of smaller version of Táax'aa, and then there's this big version of Táax'aa. So this is something, I think I said this before, this is something I've been working on since 2007. I had a project I worked with Richard Dowenhauer to talk about how could you take one of these stories and just really show like how everything works. And so we kind of messed around with ideas of doing glossaries, which we're still going to do, but then trying to do a bit more of a walkthrough of the story, showing every single thing that's in there, which is a slow crawl. But the story itself is about 5 to 6 minutes long in that telling. And what's really wild is in a 5 to 6 minute segment, you get an awful lot of stuff to study. There's a lot of verbs. Like we could probably take the whole story and like count the nouns, count the verbs, find the classifiers. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do. So we're going to keep looking at that story, but we're also going to use it to start looking at different parts of speech in Tlingit, while also looking at the little readings in Tlingit, and then starting to move through some intermediate content, starting probably with noun suffixes. So here's Shadang. Here's Takwedi, Dakwedi Yádi, Dekachinacha Robert Zuboff, Kapkotach Aweho, Akawe Angoon, Angoon Awehas Wutlagas, Gosh 1904, Gosh Kiwi. So he was probably born when people were living in Basket Bay still. Basket Bay is across from Angoon. And it's, I've never been there, but I'd like to go. Anybody here been to Basket Bay? We should go. Sometime we should go. We got several stories of Basket Bay, including one about this little beaver that we'll probably look at some point. So this is a color-coded walkthrough, and we'll just do a couple of sentences.
I don't know how we turn this.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. TV was not in the room. So Rebecca. So on the left we have Shadak, or Táax'aa. And on the right we have a picture of Basket Bay. Basket Bay does have a lot of these, we call it karst. So a lot of caves and stuff like that. As we do sort of a line-by-line reading of this story, here's how we're going to approach this part. So it's a way for us to engage in whole language in little small parts. Oh, I got to do this again. Hold on. So one of the things that I've done over the past, well, okay, I think it was about 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I was sitting with Joel Isaac, who's a friend of mine that works in Dena'ina. We were watching this presentation at a linguistics conference from these folks who are working in a language that's on the East Coast. Maybe it was Oneida, maybe it was Mohawk. but they were showing us how they color coded their language. So like they have these verbs that get very long, but they say what you want to teach people is like it's a bunch of little parts that fit together. And you can take those parts and kind of color code them. So what they were doing, they moved away from teaching whole language. Like you could teach whole language, like we learn phrases like ach tuasagu, du tuasagu, ha tuasagu, right? But then like to get to how the language functions, you want to show people the parts and show them how they work. So both Joel and I were very inspired by this. So he ran with it with Denaina, and I ran with it for Tlingit. And over the course of a couple years, came up with a color chart that matches up to basically parts of speech. So the biggest thing that we'll be wrestling with for the rest of our lives is a verb. The verb in Tlingit is the heart of the language. Like the other stuff I think is important and also complex and rich, but a lot of it is like lists of things. Like you got to memorize these lists of things. Here's a bunch of these things, here's a bunch of those things. And then the verb is the thing I think that's the most, it changes the most. And once you learn how to change it, it unlocks the language for you. So this chart up on the top shows the most important parts of the verb. There are other parts, but I think this is your starter kit, so that you can sort of learn how to start figuring out what these things are, and then there'll be more and more and more. Any questions or thoughts?
Is there like an upper limit to how long verbs usually get?
I think the longest one that I've ever seen has to do with shaking your finger. So if you said Táax'aa Yádi, Táax'aa Yádi, don't shake your finger at me. And so you say Táax'aa Yádi towards my face. And so actually don't, ach my, Yádi, face towards. Then you get to the verb, which is Táax'aa, which is a negative, which is a don't form. But if you said, they shook their finger at my face, ach Yádi, so, but they don't get, I don't think they get, like Ojibwe probably has longer verbs than we get.
Yeah. I was surprised by that because of how many different parts there are, but they kind of just fit together really tight,
They will contract.
Yeah.
And so like, we basically have, and we'll do a little bit on a verb here tonight. I think maybe we'll do a little verb stuff before we do noun suffixes. We'll see. But the key to a verb is doing the prefix and the stem. Those are going to be your two main parts. And the prefix is going to be the object, thematic, conjugation, subject, and classifier. And we'll talk about what every one of these things are. But those things are going to combine to make the prefix. And then you're going to have the stem. And the stem is going to be the root. So if yain is for something to go back and forth, like a waving your hand like this. A dog's tail goes yain. A cat. I think if you had like a grandfather clock, that might be yain, maybe. But it's like a back and forth motion like this. So then you could have yen, yain, yain. And that's the stem. So when we talk about the stem, we're always talking about the vowel. When we talk about the root, we're talking about the meaning of that verb root, right? So for example, goot is to walk. And you could say goot, goot, gut. Those are your three options, right? So that was talking about the stem. So we will be talking about all this stuff. Then as we go through this story, there are some other things. There's independent pronouns like chat, wa'eh, uhan, yuhan, hus, ka, ut. Those are all independent pronouns. We also have possessive, or maybe I'll call these relational. I like to call them relational pronouns. My, your, their, our, y'all's, them all's, someone's, some things, right? Ach, I, du, ha, ye, hastu, ka, ut, and then we're going to look at lists of these things too. And the goal here is to tell you what they are, tell you how they work, give you lists of them so you can practice using them. There's these direction and location words and suffixes: over, under, around, towards, away from, up high, down low, upriver, downriver, all those types of things. And again, there's these types of things and there's these lists to sort of study. And I think it's helpful to study them and then to come into a story and be like, okay, there it is. I see how it works. Because as a list, it's just kind of an abstract thing. And the goal here is that we're leaning on this story that we continue to study to show us how the language works. Then we get into verb. These last ones are all verb parts. So a lot of times what we'll do with a verb is we'll pull it apart. So I think maybe we talked about this in here. So there's two stages. There's what we call segmenting and glossing. So segmenting means you might take a verb, like for example, nachakuch. When you see that, that's a verb, right? So this sentence, du sagen nachakuch. There are two verbs in this sentence. So one of the things we do at this phase of our language learning is we've learned to look at stuff and say, spot the verbs, right? Du sagen at nachakuch, right? Or actually, it's you du sagen. And you will get really good at spotting where the verb is, right? So as we go through this, I might say, where's the verb? Which one's the verb? And we'll just find it. Then when you take a look at it, so here's du sagen. So this is going through a couple of different phases. I'm going to zoom in on this. So one is saying, like, what if we just colored the different parts in there without pulling them apart, just so you could see where those parts are and how they're interacting with each other. Then if you go underneath, this is what's called the segment, where you say, one is we're going to show you where the invisibles are. There's a object there. It's a zero marker. The classifier is also a zero marker. So it's also going to continue to color code so that, I got to change. Okay, I think my suffix is a different color these days. Okay. Okay, I'll get there. Because every couple of years I'll be like, I change the color scheme a little bit. But then I got to go back to older things and change it. Okay. But then you can see this. So you du sagen is thus, them or it, someone, zero classifier, name, habitual, repeatedly, and then this is what we call decessive. So used to, but not anymore. So with all of these things, I think, like, take what you're comfortable with. You do not need to know how all of this stuff works to start understanding how parts of it work. There's a lot of stuff to think it. You've listened to this story probably 10 times already. You've read it. You've read a shorter version of it. And so now we're going to read the longer version, and then we're also going to look at the parts that are there. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. So this is how it's going to work. So the way this is set up is there's a chunk of audio here. It's going to say, you're going to listen to Sha Dong say the sentence twice. And I would like everyone in here to take a turn. And so when it's your turn, you will listen to him say the sentence twice. I'll change it to the next slide so you can look at that. And then you can read it and try to sound like the speaker does. Right? So pay attention to their voice, like when it's high tone, when it's low. Listen to the vowel length, listen to the kind of rhythm of the speaker, and we're going to try and match the speaker because it's a master level speaker. Who wants to go first?
I could do it.
Cheesh. Okay, here we go. So the first part is to listen.
Awe wech ya koyek guide you to Sagan ayik tawat nusaka a spell. Awe wech ya koyek guide you to Sagan ayik tawat nusaka a spell.
You just want me to read it?
Ah,
Away, way ach yagu yikt, guide you to sagen. A yikt away at nachakach, askewu, askewu.
cheesh, cheesh. And if you listen to the recording, asqewu does get pretty faded, right? This little end part is pretty hard to hear on the recording. So yes, so we achyagoyikt, guide you to sagen, ayiktawe atnachakuch asqewu. So like thinking about this is how he starts this is how he starts the story. So also as we're learning this, we're learning how the language is functioning in a full sort of sentence context, but we're also seeing how does someone tell a story in Tlingit? Like, so this is the very first thing that he says. And then we can sort of look at it. So there's a couple of things I like to do. Look at the green things. The green things are what we call direction and location terms, okay? So when you say weh, that's over there, right? So you got ya, he, weh, you. Ya, he, weh, you. Right here, here, there, way over there. Like that's really what they do. But then you'll see that they combine with a bunch of other different things, right? So when you say aweh, it does mean that is. It could be used like that. Like I say da aweh, that's an ermine. Sa aweh, that's a seal. Achid aweh, that's my son, right? So you can use it for that. In oratory, this is used just to like, I sometimes don't even translate it when I hear it. This is how you can start something. This is how you can say, this is your new substitution for the word Because if you're speaking Tlingit, you say, Gunnish chish, achtuyak hati ati, ya yidat kone atati chikachtune. Right, so I'm using in there, which comes from English. If I change all my ums to aweh, I sound a lot more, it's just, I sound higher fluency. Gunnish chish, aweh, kone atati chikachtune, aweh. Ya hayu katungi, right? So it's also the way a speaker just hold on a second. I'm thinking of this next thing. It also is used to separate ideas. If there's a whole bunch of stuff, you might just throw a weh in there. We know that there's this other thing, right? If you counted all the words in a Tlingit book, a weh would be the winner by far. It's the most common Tlingit word. So then, oops, that one should be green too. Hold on. Every time I do this, I find more. So that is green, and that is green. So it's also used to say that. So like I could say, so there's, if there's a cup here, and there's a cup over there. I say, yaguka, weguka. There's a table here, yanadak, table over there, wenadak. So Tlingit does not have articles, right? So what are articles in a language?
Stuff like
The,
Yeah, the, a, and.
A and.
Yes. So like if you ever learn Hawaiian, Hawaiian has articles. Ka and ke are articles. So if you hear like kalua, it's the lua. If you hear kalani, it's the lani. And you kind of have to have those articles or else it sounds like a name. I found that out because I was supposed to say the petals of the flower are pretty, and I didn't put the on the flower. So then it sounded like the petals of this person named Pua are pretty, and now everybody got offended, and I didn't mean to do that. It instantly became a metaphor, right? So Tlingit does not have metaphors, or articles. So instead of saying the, you'll say ya or we, right? And so you'd say, that cat is really crazy, right? Or you could say, that cat's really good. Any questions about any of that stuff? How's everybody doing? You okay, guy? So then we have a relational pronoun here, ach, which is my, yagu. So here's a possessed form of yak. So we are also this week going to learn how to possess nouns. Okay, so you could say ach gukayi, ach guti, ach danayi, ach nadagu, ach kayakajeti, ach kudasi, or ach kinagadi. I guess it is my kudasi. On and on and on. There's a formula to it. It looks very complicated, but once you start to do it, it makes a lot of sense. This one, yikt, you have two things that are combining. Yik is in a shallow container, and then the letter T means to be at a place, usually recently arriving or touching. So what you're going to find is like these things combine. So you could say ka, on, cut, at, on, right? Or on, at, however you want to do the word order. And here you have yikt. So this is how you describe being in a boat, in a car, in a road, in a river, in a tree, or in a forest. Or in shallow water that's not deep enough to submerge. So we're going to learn all of these different we're going to learn what those types of things are. Then we're going to learn lists of them. Then we're going to start to see what the most common ones are. I think yik is pretty common.
Why do you need yikt in that sentence?
What's that?
Why do you need yikt in that sentence?
Oh, yeah. Because when we go back to it, so he says, in my boat, I boated around.
And just the yikt away is like repeating that?
Yes, so in this case, we achya guyikt, guide you to sagen, and then he wants to, you could say atnacha kucht, you could say that. But Tlingit sometimes does use repetition. So literally like, that is, that, my boat, in it, it used to be called guide, in it, I boat around all the time, seining.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a, and you'll see he does this quite a bit. Like when does he repeat stuff? What does he repeat? It's usually the stuff that's real important. And so for him, I think as he starts, it's a really interesting start to the story. Because he's like, I used to have this boat, I was always sailing in. I gave it to my son, he wrecked it. And a long time ago, we lived in the interior, right? So it's like, I don't know if his son ever listened to the story. He's like, Dad, why we got to start with that? But it's like, you wrecked a boat, right? So, yeah, that's a good question, right? So we do get repetition. And so pay attention to this stuff. Like, when does it repeat? Ask yourself why. That also, like, we see yago yikt. This is something Tlingit does all the time. So we got in the boat. But the next time he says it, he says in it. So things love to switch to third person once Tlingit tells you about it, whether it's a person or a thing. And we'll learn what is, which is basically, it's a third person non-human pronoun. So you could say duguk for their ear, but if it's a non-human thing and you want to specifically say it's non-human, you could say aguk, its ear. Okay. Okay. So going through, then we got guide, you do sagen. That's a pre-verb thing. Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna
Yádi,
go ahead.
Yádi. Okay, it's 6:15. You're late.
Hey.
Where is he?
No. That? Get out of there.
I think we got it. Okay. Got it. You do Sagan. That's going to be immortalized now. Everybody will know. Okay. So this one thing I do want to point out. I do hear people say a lot. You do a Sagan, but we want to be saying you do Sagan. And what you do Sagan says is as soon as I hear that, I think, like if he's talking about a boat, I'm like, well, that boat's gone. And if you're talking about a person, I'm going to think that person passed away. It used to be called this, but not anymore. So that's why you say you just Sagan. This is a way that a lot of people talk about deceased relatives or friends. As soon as they say you to Sagan, they're kind of letting you know that they're gone now. And in this case, yeah, his boat is gone. So then again, yeah, so we have a yikdawe, atnachakuch, a skewu. I would go around in that boat singing. We do have atnachakuch. This is what we'd call a habitual form of the verb. And what you're going to find is one, just keep an eye out for the CH at the end of a verb. Usually if that CH is popping up at the end of the verb, it means it happens all the time or it happens repeatedly. But as far as like how that is used, I would say the default meaning of something like this, like if I said atnachakuch, I would, if someone asked me to translate that, I would say, I always go by boat or car. I just go boating or drive. This is cruising. This is the cruising verb. I get in a boat and just cruise around, or I get in the car and cruise around. But in this context, it could also mean I used to. And it's really interesting because this one can get that, because you could say I used to always, but I don't anymore. But this one, it's pretty free flowing. So just always keep in mind that Lingi doesn't change verbs for time. It just changes them for event. It's all about like telling you information more about whether or not it happened or when it happened. Okay, we'll do one more, then we'll do something different. Who wants to read the next one? Okay.
Awe yekhato wasak singet khenach shatan. Awe yekhato wasak singet khenach shatan.
Away, ye chatu asak, klinge chenach shadach.
Sheesh. So let's take a minute here. Sometimes you say you do a sock, and sometimes you say ye do a sock. What's the reason? Has anybody heard this yet?
Is it when you have another subject or object in between? Another instead of the pronoun?
It's not really, it's close, but it's not really about the pronoun, but that is very close.
That does it have to do with having multiple names? Like specifically, I'm called this?
No, because what you could use, I've heard people say like Kingisti Achsayixsati, which I would interpret as Kingisti is one of my names. That's a good guess though.
Is it the verb coming before
For the
name?
yes. So if the name goes here, so if the name comes right before the verb, you're going to have you. If the name is going to come after, and it could include separated by a bunch of different words. So in this case, right? And so that's really all it comes down to. if the name comes right before the verb, but if it's going to come after, right? Just for whatever, there might be some additional information. And so what it really comes down to, what Tlingit likes to do, is it says, I will put the most important thing first. So the most important thing is that my name, well, this isn't my name, but if it were, is Sha Da, and that's what's going to come first. But in here, I am called in Tlingit Sha Da. So just keep that in mind. It is something I think, there's a number of things in Tlingit that are just sort of, they're just shifting on us a little bit. I think yay and you, because I think people would hear it, like, I don't know, this speaker says yay, this speaker says you. Maybe in Yakutat we say it this way, in Rangoon we say it this other way. So people start to sort of come up with ideas on why, but in this case, it's really just about the word order. If it's coming right after the name, you, otherwise, yay. And you'll see this in other places, but I would say this is like, sometimes those of us that study Tlingit, we call it classical Tlingit, which means it's something that is maybe in jeopardy of being lost. So let's keep it in mind. So going through this one, we see again, Awe Yechatu Wasak Tlingit Enach Shadak. And that name itself, it's made up of a noun and then two directional parts. So one that is what we call a relational noun, around, and then which means to be residing or resting at a place. Shadag. I was told this name refers to an ancient village that was in the interior when people lived around a mountain. And then, so like we're going to learn how, we're using this story. We're going to keep taking a slow crawl through it to look at all the different parts and how they work. But then we're going to use this to sort of build up our knowledge of how the Tlingit language works. This will give us previews into stuff that we're going to start learning more and more about. Any questions about any of that stuff? Okay. So I think we should do some stuff with this one. Have you folks looked at this presentation before? Okay. So the title of this is People Use Our Language, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're going to learn throughout the course of this year is designed to encourage you to make this a language of use. To make it useful, you need, well, to be able to use it, it's always useful, but to be able to use it, you need to know how it works. Or else you end up getting a little bit stuck, right? So the whole goal is to just like get it out of your hands, get it out of your hands. So this was made by Ida and myself while we were teaching. We started this when we were teaching, I think it was in Natasahini in maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We did a workshop in Carcross, and we started like talking about how can we come up with like an intro to verbs sort of teaching thing. So the idea here is to really think about how verbs work at a introductory level, which means like intro to Tlingit grammar. Because I think beginning Tlingit, we just do a lot on repetition, learning words, learning sounds. There's an awful lot to all of that. But now we get to this level, and we're like, okay, now we gotta learn how this thing works. And we're gonna start with little chunks at a time. Every now and then we'll look way ahead, but we do like these little chunks at a time. So a Tlingit verb is made up of a prefix and a stem. Those are the two parts. There are there are verbs that only has the stem. There's nothing in the prefix. It's kind of rare, but for example, this is a whole, here's two, it's a whole verb, it's just two letters, and just one syllable. So the first one is cha. Does anybody know what that's saying? Cha. Has to do
They're
with,
eating.
has to do with eating.
Oh, yeah.
There's a specific way to translate it.
No, it's not the command form.
It is.
It is.
That's not icha.
I thought it was akha.
Acha is they are eating it. Icha is you are eating it. We're going to get to both of these.
I thought it was akha. I guess just kha. Okay.
So yeah, if we're sitting there, this did happen the other day. Sometimes you got one qalins iyatki telkatin hastu tuasaku, hastu tuaushku, hastu atchai. Ajoy kwash. Yaya qisakha. Cook kha. So sometimes if you got kids, they don't want to eat their food. And then you're going to say, eat it. So kha is eat it. I was getting very grumpy with one of my kids the other day.
Would you say kha'idat or yidat kha?
Well, I would say khate.
Khate.
Yeah. So like yidat is more used to use time references to at this time now. But day is like do the thing right now. Okay, good question. One more. Here's another one. These are pretty unusual. Ta. That's a whole verb. Ta. How would anybody know what that one is? Anybody heard nata?
Oh, sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then what would ta?
Go sleep.
Nata
Wait.
would
It'd be like sleep. You. No.
no, that's the command.
Someone is sleeping?
Yes, they are sleeping. A third person is sleeping. It's very unusual because there's just nothing there. I mean, there is, but there's technically two zeros. So, okay, so we'll get to that. So again, prefix and stem. So there's a few different terms that we're going to sort of get familiar with, and some of you might already know them. What are we talking about when we say transitivity? Anybody know?
Whether the verb acts on an object or not.
Yeah, so when in Tlingit, when we're talking about transitivity, we're saying, is there an object? Is there a subject? Are there both? Are there neither? Those are, so you can have a verb that only has an object. You can have a verb that only has a subject. You can have a verb that has both of them, and you can have a verb that has neither of them. And it's important to know that because you cannot change that. Once it's given to you in the theme, I mean, you can, but just for now, you can't. You can't yet. How's that? There's this thing called a thematic prefix, which is also called an incorporated noun. There might be a day, like 10 years from now, like we might be using totally different terms for some of this stuff, but this is what we got for now. Thematic is a noun that's put into a verb. You could put head, like that one when I said shkek, shakautlen, shakautlen, right? They shook their finger. Ek is a finger, sha is the fingertip, and then ka is a horizontal surface. So those three nouns are built into the verb. So we'll look at all kinds, you'll learn how to spot these. And so again, coming back to like the method of learning Tlingit, here's this thing, here's a list of them. And so while you're memorizing the list of them, we go back into the stories and we go and find them. And we will find them, right? And so we'll look at also some of the most common ones. You can have up to 4 nouns on a verb, and you can also have, there's 4 different spots where the conjugation prefixes come in. And these are things that pop up to put the verb into different modes. Like when you say nata, that na is a certain type of thing and it has a certain purpose. If you say like kukagut, there's a reason why like that's going to be kuka for the I am going to. Gachtu, we are going to. Gachye, y'all are going to. There are like certain combinations of things, and when you put them together, they'll result in specific prefixes. And the last one that affects them is the classifier. So we'll talk about the classifier, and I'll see what y'all know about it, and we'll sort of start looking at examples. So the stem is made up of the verb root, which has the meaning, and the stem, which is all about what the vowel is doing. So this is all the parts of the verb. It gets very long and complicated, but really, this is everything. And what I'll do for slideshows like this, because it has content, then it has things where we try to predict what the answer is going to be. So because that's the technique we're using, I will put copies of the slideshow up. But if we only get to slide number 10, it'll only go to 10. So try to be good predictors and don't just go find some version of it and memorize all the answers. Although, that does help. I don't know. Okay, any questions about that stuff? Everybody doing okay? Okay, we'll get up to our first verb, then we'll take our break. So I like to draw lots of pictures of how this stuff works. I like to mess around with different colors, different ideas to try and think about how can we continue to visualize. Because for some people, certain ones will hit more than others. So I have a number of different approaches to really describe the same thing. When you're moving a verb around to talk about who is doing it and whom is it happening to, these are the really important parts. So you could take this illustration and this will help you conjugate so many different verbs, right? And so to say love, chat sechan, you love me. Cha sechan, which becomes ich sechan, I love you, right? And so what we keep in mind is Tlingit has a specific order that these things go in. It must always go object, subject, verb. I took a linguistics class and they're like, most of the languages in the world go subject, verb, object. Some of them go subject, object, verb. And 0% of them go object, subject, verb. I was like, what? Can't we just be 1%? You make us just something? So it is rare to do it in this order, but this is the order that it will always be in. Okay. So when we look at how these things work, there's this spot we call preverb. Preverb means the word or words before the verb. There's also a postverb, which you'll learn about later, which would be the word or words after the verb. They're still part of the verb itself. So we have a verb phrase, which would be all the words you need to understand how that verb works. You cannot remove it without altering the meaning. Then when we say verb, we're talking about that single word that's made up of several different parts. So in the preverb, the ones that affect who is doing it to whom are this one, chush, which means to the self, which could also be contracted to a sh, which I should have put on there. So when you say shtuqa khattati, you have chush to one's own insides, which is usually the thoughts. And if you say shtuqaltu, it's also there as well. So there's a thing to note that if you see this little plus D in parentheses, what that is signaling to you is it's going to push the classifier to a plus D form. So for example, if I say chashletu, I'm teaching it, the classifier is, it should be sha, chashlatu, I'm teaching it. But if I say I'm studying it, shtu chal tu, because that classifier has gone to this plus D form, which we'll talk about what that means, okay? But just note, so if you put whoosh right in front of a verb, you should have the plus D version of the classifier. So if I say chwasatin, I saw it or I see it, but I say whoosh wutustin, or whoosh wutudzatin. We saw each other. We see each other, right? So chush is the self, whoosh is to each other. Hus is a plural marker for the third person. It exists outside of the verb itself. And this, it does get a little bit, for me, this is something I mix up quite a bit. Like I'll say, chat has sechan, where it should be has chat sechan. So as you read charts like this, it goes left to right. And that's the order that you're going to say that. So you'd say, I love them. Has, or they love me. Has chat sechan. Okay? So you'll learn how to pick which ones are there, and you can also look at a verb and look at a chart like this and say, oh, this one says tusechan. We love them, right? So there's the we right there. Any questions about that?
Question about that classifier. I noticed the note down in the lower right that says plus D for S, L, and SH classifiers. Does that mean that you don't add it for a null classifier?
Yeah, so Tlingit has this thing called the fourth person, right? Somebody did it or it happens, right? So if you say, Chat ditzafon, I am loved. So the fourth person subject, de, has a special set of rules. And this is what it is. All S, L, and SH classifiers must always be plus D when de is the subject. All zero classifiers must be minus D. And we will learn what that means. But it's just something, that's why you'd say, chwasatin, I saw it. Whoosh wutudzatin, with the Z sound, we saw each other. And you'd say, chat wutudzatin, I have been seen. It's a good question. Okay.
So it's not that those other pluses, plus Ds change. It's just that fourth person.
It is
right?
only that fourth person, which is why there's
Okay.
this asterisk here. So just say like, it has its own special rule. The fourth person just special. It's like, I'll come in and mess around the classifiers. So as far as like who things happen to, chat is me, ha is us, is you, ye is y'all, zero or is them, ka or k is someone, ut is something, and again sh to the self, right? Which will push the verb to be plus D. A couple of things to note about the object pronouns. Some of them have a hyphen, some of them don't. Why is that?
The ones with the hyphen are attached and the ones without are not.
Yes, so when you write the verb itself, these ones are attached to the verb. They are part of that same word. The ones that are not will be their own separate word written before the verb itself. So you'd say chat yak'e, 2 words. Ha yak'e, 2 words. Yak'e, 1 word. Yi yak'e, 2. Yak'e, 1. Ha yak'e, 2. Ku yak'e, 1. At yak'e, 2. You can't say shak'e, that doesn't work. You could say shwatlik'e, I made myself better. But that's kind of a weird thing to say. So there are fewer subjects than objects. For the subjects, these are your only options. Ch for I, t for we, I for you, y for y'all. The third person is always unmarked. Whenever you say they did it, a single third person, it's always unmarked. So just keep that in mind. And that's why you say ta. And I think my brain always had a hard time with ta. Because I'm like, what are they doing? Ta. And that is saying they are sleeping. With one single syllable, we say like that, right? So it's just something to keep in mind. De is a fourth person. It's not a third person. It means someone did it or it happened. That's why you say, Yuchat du wasak. People call me Kone. Okay. Okay. So in this exercise, we will be changing the subject, but only between first person singular, well, I think we're only doing singulars in this. So I, you, they. Those are the three that we're going to do. We should probably take our break before we talk about the classifier. Okay. Take 5. Okay. Hearing no objection, be back in 5 minutes. Okay. Gonna teach. So we are going to focus on the subject. The subject always and forever is immediately before the classifier. So we need to talk about the classifier. But when we look at this, we're really going to switch these verbs between cha, I, and 0, which might trigger. So when you come back to here, there's this little green arrow right here and this little green arrow. That means the third person just has it just works a little bit different in Tlingit than the rest. And here's why, or I don't know really why, but here's how it's different. So for the subjects, everything has a sound. When you say cha, I am doing it. When you say tu, we are doing it, right? So this sound directly relates to who is doing it, except for the third person, which is just really interesting, right? So you could say, I'm eating, you're eating, eating. Like, so if you just completely vaporize third person pronouns in English, you would be using somewhat Tlingit grammar. But everyone would be confused, right? Because you would just not have a pronoun there when you should be expecting a they, he, or she. So that's one thing, is like Tlingit just does not mark the third person subject. The other thing is Tlingit does not mark the third person object unless you have a third person object and a third person subject. They did it to them. Now the object becomes the letter A. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay? And we'll look at specific examples of how this works. The other thing is all of these have a plural. T is the plural of cha. Y is the plural of I. Has is how you pluralize the third person. And it exists outside of the verb, and it can pluralize either the object or the subject or both. So those are some parts that we'll just be thinking about those things. So we're thinking about these subjects. Cha, I, 0. Cha, I, 0. Then we're thinking about this classifier. What can you folks tell me? What have you all learned about this wonderful thing called the classifier? Tell me anything you know.
Every teacher so far is like, these are really complicated, you'll learn about them later. Me? Just
Yep.
be so mean or anything, we'll talk about the
Pretty much.
stuff, you know?
It always comes right before the stem.
Yes, it does.
And it shows up in one of 4 different ways. It's like the same thing, but wearing 4 different outfits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like it has costumes. It's a neat way to look at it. It's time for a costume change. Okay. Anything else?
Well, now we know that if you're using whoosh or chush, you put the plus D version in.
Right. That's right. Okay. Here's the classifier in Tlingit. I think all Na-Dene languages have a classifier to them. Dena'ina, Navajo, Apache, Tagish, Tashoni. We all mess around with these classifiers. They all function differently within each language, but probably have a very similar function. So every Nádini language should have a classifier, I think. For Tlingit, which I know, every verb has to have a classifier. You cannot have a verb without a classifier. That's the first thing. Every verb has one. The other thing is it's going to belong to one of these four groups: 0, S, L, or SH. You cannot change the group without, you just have a different verb. So if you say yak a and kesh ushk a, those are two different verbs, technically. Yak a, good. Kesh uke, not good. Kesh ushke, evil or bad. Okay? So if you change the group, you have a totally different verb. Okay? So it's got to stay within the group. So once you see, if you look up the verb theme and it says it's a 0 classifier, it will have to be one of these four. Those are the only ones you get to pick from. If it's an L classifier, it has to be one of these four. Now, each of these groups has some meaning loosely associated with it. It doesn't mean it's that way every time, but it has a logical function. The 0 groups are the most common. It's just like the default thing. It is good. I am sick. Right? Those types of things. They are walking. This is the most common, and then S and L are also, would be like the second most. It probably goes S and then L as far as what happens from it. The reason why a verb would typically switch to an S or L classifier, one of the common ways to say it, it's not just that way, somebody made it that way. Yak-a, good. Aushik-a, they improved it. They made it good. Yanik, sick. Chat yisanik, you gave me a cold, you got me sick. So we're going to change, sometimes we'll change the classifier to say we have to add agency to the verb. We have to change, like somebody made that thing happen. Okay?
Is there a difference between those two?
Yes. So S is commonly used to classify things. Yati, it to be. City, to be one of those things. So you've already used this type of logic, right? Not every time, but commonly this says we're doing some sort of category thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why it's called a classifier, because it classifies information. Okay? Not every time, but quite commonly.
Would that be like Yechatyati versus like I don't know, Irish Chatsati?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I am. I am one of these things.
Okay.
Here's another example. Kate teen. I can see a dog. That's all I'm telling you. If your dog ran away, I see a specific dog, your dog. I see you, and you are a specific thing. So if you're ever talking about some, like, I saw a whale. Hey, I saw that same whale that we saw last night. Okay? The L classifier is used quite a bit to sort of say it has one of those things. For example, somebody built a house, they put a big killer whale fin on it, goosh, so it's called Shigushi hit, the finned house. There's a name for anybody know what we call a vest?
I should. I don't.
Anybody?
Jenny?
Shush Ginny. right? So that's a negative form of shijini. This shirt is shijini because it has arms. Shijini has arms. Shikuku tsao would be a hat that like a Mickey Mouse hat that has ears. That is very common with the L classifier. Not every time, but that's a common use of it. Goose. Weather has clouds. Okay?
So Litzine is, it has strength.
Probably. Because Yetzin means alive, Shitzin means strong. So yeah, I would probably it says it has life, but yeah, it can get metaphorical very fast. And so that's not every time, right? But that's sort of a loose, that's the logic that's attached to it. But it can be overridden by just, it's like, that's just an L classifier. That's just the way it is. But going back to seeing, Kate Chatin, I can see a dog. Ikatli Chosatin, I saw your specific dog. Ikatli Chashatin, I am watching your dog. So in that case, we see the execution of abstract, specific, agency. Now it's different, right? To see something is different than to watch it. Here's another one. You could say, Cho'ach. I could say, We'achi Cho'ach. I hear that song. We'achi Chosa'ach. I'm listening to that song. Right? So that's very common for the classifier to switch to say, okay, somebody's doing it or it's getting specific somehow. But then sometimes you just need a new way to use this same sort of verb root. Which leaves us with SH, which is the least common, roughly has something often to do with not liking to do it, not wanting to do it, not liking to do it, something that's kind of unpleasant. Not all the time, but you say yak-e, good, kesh-uk-e, bad, kesh-ushke, evil. You could say shechet, lucky, kesh-ushchet, not lucky, kesh-ushchet, unlucky. So isn't, then the opposite. So there's a few of these verbs that have the opposite in the SH classifier. That's the logic of the groups. So there is a logic, but it's not like it's that way every single time. Okay? Any questions? It's big stuff. It's big concept day in intermediate Tlingit. You all are smart enough.
What did you say the null classifier was usually for?
It's just like the default. It's like if you needed to come up like, okay, this is walking. Gut. Woo gut. Gut, right? But if you say, gan de chasagut we cake, I let the dog outside. So now this is saying like I allowed them to go outside or let them in or out. That gets an S classifier. So this is just the most common, like, okay, we need a verb for this. All right, here's a zero classifier verb. Okay, well, how do we say we do this thing? Let's getting more specific. Oh, make an S1 out of it. Yeah. And like, it's not like that way every time, but this is the sort of the base logic model for how this thing works. Ready for the next part? There's only 2 more parts, then you have the whole thing down. But you're on your way. So I like to say this top left here, that is the classifier. 0, sa, sha, sha. That's what they are. Okay? You have nothing. Sa, sha, sha. Someone made an interesting observation. His name is Chachi Will Geiger. That 3 of them are body parts that are right next to each other. Anybody know what your sa is, where it's at? It's the base of your neck. Anybody know what your sha is, where it's at?
Sounds similar to
Nose.
Neck. Sh is nose. Sha. But sha, you usually don't ever say it on its own. But if you say shaka on your neck, that's how you say it in your mouth, which is what the thing has just got like little surprises for you. And then sha is your head. So when he first pointed out, he's like, whoa, you've got like sa, sha, and sha. I said, why is there 0? And I went, but maybe it just goes up into the sky. Maybe it's something not as terminal. Okay. So these are your base forms. 0, sa, sha, sha. That's what the classifier is in each of those groups. But you could change it. Why would you change it? The main reason why you would use the plus I form is you say, it happened. It became that way. That's what the plus I most commonly signals. So when you say yak'e, it is good. When you say chitzin, it is strong. When you say siti, it is one of those things. Okay, so that's what the plus I does. It only has one other function, and that's to say it might be that way. But don't worry about that right now. It's called the potential. It's a very big verb form. You will see it. You'll see it later. But for now, just think of plus I as, yep, it happened or became that way. That's what the plus I does. It's a very logical function in Tlingit. And if things are happening right now, they're often 0. Because it hasn't happened yet, even if it's happening right now. That's usually the case. The second thing you can do is you can add the letter D to it. Most commonly here, what's going on is you're saying the subject is also the object. That's what the plus D usually does. I'm doing it to myself, we're doing it to each other, I'm doing it and it affects me. So you'll see some things are just naturally a plus D verb, but whenever we say plus D, we're usually talking about what we call middle voice. English doesn't do this, but other languages do. Shchodzetin, saw myself. Shtuchodletu, I taught it inside myself. Atwujakain, I jumped around. Atchodjakain. That's it. That's everything. The other thing that the plus D can do, there's a select group of verbs that have an object. You can boot the object out and it pushes it plus D. There's not a whole lot of them. But if anyone's ever learned the verb for sewing, if you say chaqez, I'm sewing it. Like a vest, moccasins, whatever the thing you're sewing. But if you say chadaqez, I am sewing. It's not about what you're sewing. It's just same with chatu. I'm reading this, the book, the paper, this classifier chart. Chatatu, I'm reading. Right, so the focus shifts to the action. There's not a whole lot of them that do that, but you will. There's a handful of them. As you review the beginning Tlingit workbook, you'll see, oh look, this one is plus. There's a D in there. That's interesting. This is a big thing. This is a very, very big thing in Tlingit. It's one of the central driving forces of Tlingit grammar. And you're going to get it. You will. Even if right now it sounds like a bunch of coded language.
Well, just hearing like the beginning parts of it makes it feel less, complicated if you like mysterifies it or whatever.
Yeah. because I think you just think about like, oh, this is one of those zero, it's a zero classifier, it's an S classifier, it's an L classifier. And once you see that, you'll say, okay, this is an S classifier, it's always going to be sa, unless it happened, then it'll be se. Just start with that. That's a really good framework for it. Sa or se, sha or she, sha or she, zero or ya. That's why all those for like hua and ye, like we'll see what they look like. Okay. Let's watch them in action. Here's how this works. Here's a verb root. Cha, which has to do with eating, right? This verb has to do with eating. This little number one means there's another cha. Anybody know what the other cha verb root is? Number two is? Paddling. Yes. So eating, paddling. Okay? So we're going to eat. And I'm sorry if you're hungry and this is the first verb we do. As we sort of learn how these verbs work, we take a closer look at the verb theme. And actually, I'm going to take a moment to color code this, because we are using a specific set of colors these days, or at least I am. I don't know. So the S is going to be red. The classifier is going to be purple. And the stem and root, the root and the stem are going to be brown. So when you look up a verb, or his name now is Nu Kakawu, David Strong, encouraged me about a year and a half ago to spend my summer color coding the dictionary that I'm working on. And I figured out how to do it so I didn't have to go in it. I didn't go individually and like blue, 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 red, right? It's like everything is like linked to a certain sort of part, and then it pushes those parts together. So I could just say all these parts make them blue. So the goal here is to make the object blue every time. So when you're seeing blue, that's that list of objects. When you're seeing a red S, oh, that's that list of subjects. When you see purple, that's a classifier. And when you see brown, like that's the stem and the root. Again, the root is meaning, the stem is the vowel. So as you look through this, one is you know there must always be an object there. You know there must always be a subject there. And you also know you can now go through, that's a weird verb to change the object and subject for, but if you talk to your food, you could say, Ik kwacha, I'm going to eat you, right? Say that to a potato if you want to. I don't know when you'd say like chatyecha, like that's a weird verb to, you know, but we could do it. Like once we learn how to do this stuff, we could. Okay. So coming back, now you know I can just grab from that object list, grab from that subject list, and we talked about this a little bit on break. It is a bit artificial to say things like chat, se, chan. But if you do that 1,000 times, you'll go chatisachan, ichsachan, itisachan, yitisachan, haschasachan. You'll be able to change that any way you want to. And what gets really fun is when you could do that while you're flowing in the language. Like you will reach a point, if you keep doing this, keep trying it, the exercises get more complicated, the language does get bigger, but you reach a point where like, I know how to say that. I know how to say that thing. And that way when you look up a new verb, because like I wonder what the verb is to pack something into a suitcase. Once you look it up, then you can say, Achna atika kochak, I'm going to pack my clothes. You will learn how to do that. It unlocks the stuff, but only if you stick with it. And that means you can't just say, yeah, I listened to that lecture on it. Good enough. Like we're going to do some exercises to see how it works. Okay, 20 minutes left. Here we go. So when you look at a verb theme, it gives you some additional information in parentheses. And the first one that's in parentheses is going to be either 0, na, ga, or qa. So this verb theme was developed by Jeff Lear. It was adjusted by Nora Marks Dowenhauer and Richard Dowenhauer, then was adjusted by Carrie Eggleston, then was adjusted by James Crippen, was adjusted by and Seth Cable, and then I did some things with it as well. The idea is to give you everything you need. And so you'll reach a point, so if you went into the Tlingit Verb Dictionary, so let me pull that up. So if you were to go into the dictionary that is being created now, and you were to look up a verb, like we'll go look up that packing verb since I mentioned it. So as you go through here and you find a verb to pack something, right? So the idea here is this information from here to here actually gives you everything you need to use this verb. So there is a verb database, so you can look up I'm packing, you're packing, you packed, I packed, they packed. And this is also like packing clothes would be the same thing as like stacking wood and putting away toys. Like it's all the same verb. It just has to do with like putting things away or stacking them or packing them. So again, you see blue object, ka, which is a thematic prefix, which means a horizontal surface, subject, who's going to do it, zero classifier, chalk, right? Everything you need, and then this part, the zero. So the goal was sort of like going over this stuff, is saying like there's a lot of information here, I understand that. But if you can get this stuff, you can put Tlingit together, and you could also look at Tlingit and say, okay, that looks like a future thing. I have to just look up this verb root and I think I can get it, okay? So just like the classifier has like a loose function, like a meaning to the groups, so does this. So every verb has a conjugation type. So there's a zero, na, ga, and qa. The conjugation type will be revealed in the command form. So I said cha for eat it. So you know that's a zero because you didn't hear anything before. And I said nata for go to sleep. You know that's a na verb. You might have heard someone say gidahan. And so then you know that's ga because you're hearing that g sound. And you might hear someone say qanu. So then you know that's, so the command form reveals which one it is. They are loosely associated with meaning. Zero means there's some sort of goal associated with it. There's an end point. Na means it's just, it doesn't mean it goes on forever, it just means there's no specified ending. Ga is upward, qa is downward. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, sometimes it doesn't. Because if you want to tell someone to be good, you say igak-e, and I don't know why that's really an upward thing. And so is tletsin, that's an upward thing. Seeing something specific is a downward thing. But what you'll find is this stuff is associated with how the verb conjugates. And it will make sense later. But just know that that thing's there. There's also different types of verbs, which I think we've talked about. Act, event, state, motion, position. I think we've done enough information for now. We just got to get in there and take a look. Any questions? It's Information Overload Tuesday. Okay. So this is a zero classifier verb. That means these are our only two options for this verb. For this exercise, it's either going to be zero or ya. Those are the only, so that, because we know the classifier group, we've got it narrowed down to this. This is how it's going to work. So we're going to go over these four modes. Do it, doing it, did it, will do it. We're not going to do negatives right now. We'll do negatives some other time. It's easier to start with the positives. And what do you think this is telling you here? Underneath these words, do it, doing it, did it, will do it.
Tense, right? Or like,
Which classifier to use?
Well, it's telling you
Oh,
if
no,
it's plus
that's
I.
oh,
Did it is the only one in this case that will go plus I. Otherwise, your classifier will be 0 every time. So we went over this a little while ago. How would I say eat it? Anybody know?
Ha,
Yeah, or what?
Huh.
Everybody say ha.
Ha.
ha,
huh,
Ha.
Ha.
ha,
Ha.
Ha.
ha,
Ha.
ha.
Okay. So now, we'll look at what the underlying parts are. We're not going to look at that right now. So this is how you command someone to eat it. There has to be a specific thing that you're talking about. This doesn't mean go eat something. This means like, see that thing? Eat it. Okay?
Did you have to say like atcha?
Atcha would be eat something.
Okay.
So that's how, like, someone's like, ah, eat aha. Atcha. Eat something. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you for this one, the stem will stay the same. These ones, these three. So when we say 1, 2, 3, this is I, you, they. Okay? So what we should expect is cha, I, 0. But we know that there's an object there, so I should expect the letter A right there. So with that, the stem will be cha. So coming back to this list, so here's cha, I, 0. So what should I expect for I am eating it?
Ha. Ha.
Yeah, oh well. Everybody say cha cha.
Ha, ha,
Ha. Ha.
Cha cha.
ha, ha,
Ha. Ha.
ha, ha.
Ha ha.
ha, ha.
I'll tell you 2 rules about prefixes. They won't have any high tones in them. You'll never have a high tone in a prefix. If it has a consonant, it has to have a vowel. So now, the one thing we're going to change is cha is going to change to I. But then I'm going to tell you, but it's going to be long in this case. So sometimes you'll say I and E, I and E. So we're going to do the verb and then I'll tell you why. Because I just told you 2 rules, so now we got to do another verb. And I'll tell you 1 more rule. Okay. You are eating it. Yeah, or what? Yeah, or what? Icha.
Iha,
Iha.
Iha,
Icha.
Iha.
iha,
Iha.
Iha.
Icha.
iha.
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 Okay. So the first rule I said, in the prefix, all the vowels will be low. The second rule, if you have a consonant, you also have a vowel. You have to have one. Here's the third one. Well, not the third one, but here's a third one. The second person subject will be I, a single I. If there's no vowel in the classifier, it'll be long. Okay? There is no vowel there. So that's why it's E instead of I. Okay? You'll see other examples. There's another one that does that. So here, the mechanics is the subject changes to 0, but that triggers the object to change to the letter A. So with that said, what should we expect for they are eating it? Yeah, or what?
Aha,
Aha.
Acha.
aha,
Aha.
Acha.
Aha.
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 And so a lot of you have probably done this verb in these three ways, right? Chacha, icha, acha. Chacha, icha, acha. We're doing the same thing, but now we're paying attention to what exactly is going on when we do those things. Because the idea here is to move away from memorization and into the mechanics of an entire language. It is probably, if there was the difficulty Olympics, I think Tlingit would be a gold medalist, right? It is a very difficult language. But these days we try not to tell you that until you're like a year and a half in. By the way, but I love Richard Downharbor. He used to when he's like day one, beginning Tlingit, he's like, this is the most difficult language in the world. So let's go. Let's lie to them. Okay. So I usually say fun or interesting. Okay. So what's going to happen? Let me tell you the two things that happen now. When we shift down to this next category, did it, there's three things that happen. Okay. The first thing is the classifier switches to ya. That's going to change the way it sounds. The second thing is we're going to add this marker y. Right? So this marker y is what we call the perfective marker. This doesn't mean past tense. Because I can say chasaku, I know it right now. I can say ichsatin, I see you right now. So it's not a time marker. But when y pops up by itself in a verb, what Tlingit is saying, tell me whether or not it happened. Oh, my color's changed. Okay, let's try to figure out what happened. So Tlingit says, tell me whether or not it happened. So that's what the perfective marker does. So you're going to have y, subject, ya, and now the verb stem is going to go long and high. So you're going to have cha, cha, cha. But once you've got the stem, that will not change, right? Cha, 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 cha. So you might have heard this before, or you might know how to say it. I ate it. Anyone know it or have a prediction?
Huaha.
Yep.
Huaha.
Huacha,
Aha.
huacha,
Huaha.
Quaha.
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 huacha.
Quaha.
Huaha.
Quaha.
So now that y'all are getting your verb conjugation licenses, you have to focus on vowels. I think beginning Tlingit, you focus on consonants a lot, because is a hard sound to make, and is a hard sound to make, right? Maybe you hadn't made those sounds before. And you're still going to focus on making those sounds, and there's going to be some that you got to focus on a little bit more than others. Now we've got to look, that's a long low vowel, and then that's a long high vowel. So it can't go chua, it has to go chua, chua. So I want you to just focus on those, pay attention. It has to go high. That first one has to stay low, and they both have to be long. And then we'll see the components that are in it, okay? For the second person, I'm going to give you the prefix, and I'll tell you why. There are two different options for the second person. One is, and for a zero classifier, it could be iya or it could be ye. This one is iya, I-Y-A. So how would I say, if that's the prefix, I just told it to you, I-Y-A, that's how you spell it. How would I say you ate it? Yeah, oh what?
Yaha.
Yeah, oh what? Iyacha,
Yaha.
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 yacha,
Yaha.
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 yacha. Yeah, oh what?
Yaha.
Yaha.
So now, one thing's going to change, and it's going to trigger another change. What is it? To go to the third person.
The I has to come off.
Yes, so the I will change to a 0, and then
Add an A.
the object 0 will change to an A. So what do we, so to say they ate it, anybody know?
Ayaha.
We're going to get awacha,
Awacha.
Awaha.
awacha,
Awaha.
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 Okay, we're going to get this full verb.
Like we talked about before, like the you and the ha switching, but how do you know whether it's going to be a you or a ya or a wa?
Well, so what we'll look at, okay, let's do this. I'll give you the next 3, then we'll talk about how futures are put together. And then we'll look at a slide that shows all the parts that are there, so you can see which parts are specifically changing, and that might answer that question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to eat it. What we're going to get is the stem will be high. It's going to be long and high again. And this one is going to be kakaha, kakaha,
Kukaha.
Kukaha.
kakaha.
Kukaha.
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 You are going to eat it. We're going to get kakiha,
Kakiha.
kakiha,
Gakiha.
kakiha.
Gakiha.
And then they are going to eat it. Akwaha,
Akwaha.
Akwaha.
So, one of the goals here is I should be able to show you any verb and you should be able to do all these things with it. Not tomorrow, but before too long. Right? And so, but we're going to go step by step to get there. And when we look at this, these are all of the components that are in there, right? So here you've got, this is a conjugation prefix. This is the classifier. Here's the stem and the root, right? So 0, 0, cha gets you cha. Then if we go down 1, now what we've got, object, subject, classifier. All 3 of them are right there. So what do we change when we look across the board? Cha, 0. But 0 triggers this 0 to change to a. So like when we look under the hood at what's going on, right? So it's like you've learned how to drive a little bit. But now I'm like, okay, let's get in this one where we got to change the gears, right? And so now but you could do that. You can. When we go down a level to this one, we added the perfective marker and the classifier switched to its plus I form. To say, oh yeah, it did happen. I did eat it. You did eat it. They did eat it. So in this case, you have 0, y, or you have object, y, subject, ya. And if we look across, the only thing we change, cha, 0, just like the one above it. And if you look down, the exact same thing. It got longer because ga, ka is the magic combination for the future. Every future verb has to have those 3 things. And if you put those 3 things in that order, you always have a future verb. So the way Lingi does this is by just adding certain parts in certain combinations. But it's not like infinite combinations. There's these wheels. You like set this dial to ga, set this dial to set this dial to ka, and they all are certain types of things. We'll talk about what those things are. But that's why every single future will have this certain set of sounds. because things are interacting with each other, but they appear in a certain order. You do get variables though, because some of these are like, I would say you slept, ye ta, as opposed to iya. And there's other ones that are going to be like that. Ye too, you read it. What this comes down to is coming back to this, because it's a zero conjugation, that's what gives you iya. And you'll see stuff like that too, where all these little things, and you'll see stuff that makes sense. Because I'll say, Wei de ye good. You went over there. But if you came here, hot iya gut. It will, and so Tlingit is so interesting to me because it's like reveal, reveal, reveal. There's always more things to see, which is fun. I know it can be overwhelming sometimes. I do know that. I had to learn how to speak Tlingit myself at one point. There's a lot of people who get so mystified by this part that they just leave. But if you stick with it, you will end up speaking. I know we're out of time. Thoughts or questions, concerns, complaints? I'll accept complaints in English today only. You may have to get after. I'm just kidding. Just keep in mind, you're going to be okay. Sometimes we have big concept days. Then we'll go back and we'll just do other things, and then we'll come back to the bigger concepts. As we go farther, I think the big concept stuff comes in shorter intervals. We just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper, but there's only so much stuff there. So it's usually like, here's these things, watch how they interact. Yeah, you okay? It's okay, everybody. You're doing great. Cheesh.
Tuye Kwasatin.
Sheesh.
Sheesh.
Sheesh.